Hi and welcome. I'm Laura Lee. This show is dedicated to those central mysteries of life. Who are we? Where do we come from? Where are we going? That's the adventure of life, and it's a big, fascinating universe out there. That's why we call this show Conversation for Exploration. Basically, what I wanted to address here is a couple of things. That really film is the arena in which we play out mythologies. That mythology is a continuation of a very long story. So what we're seeing and what we're devising and what we're reflecting back to ourselves is really just the latest chapter of a very, very long story. And when we talk to a mythologist such as John Ebert, we can begin to see those threads and how they are transformed in the past and really what the function of mythology is, to tell us stories about ourselves and how our world works. And in this interview, I want to look at, in particular, the feminine roles, in particular the feminine dragon slayer, which I think is so fascinating, in how you say that it shows up, that icon shows up at moments of great social transformation. You can certainly say that ours is one of those. And how also myth serves us to deal with deep anxiety and big questions such as the machine versus the human soul. And I find it fascinating how far back in time that goes, even to ancient Sumeria and the first appearance that we know of the big city. Also, I want to look at hunter-gatherer to the horticulturalist to the agriculturalist, and how mythology changed our relationship with animals, for example. I find that fascinating. And also propitiating the gods. What is our understanding of how higher forces interact with us? Those are just a few of the questions I have for John Ebert, having read his book, Celluloid Heroes and Mechanical Dragons. Film is the Mythology of Electronic Society. His earlier book, by the way, is Twilight of the Clockwork God, Conversations on Science and Spirituality at the End of an Age. So, John, welcome. Good to have you here.
Thanks for inviting me.
John, as a mythologist, I'm not surprised that you have focused on the arena of film and cinema, because that seems to be the great theater in which we play out so much of our mythology. Tell me about your background as a mythologist, why this is your life's work, studying mythology, and how you're viewing contemporary society and the myths that we spin for ourselves.
Well, my background is, I was born and raised in Arizona, Phoenix, Arizona, and I was born into a kind of a giant megalopolis, a huge, huge city. It's a city totally without culture or soul of any kind whatsoever. It's just parking lots and freeways and strip malls. And growing up in that environment, I didn't learn anything about anything, except how to drive a car, basically. And I spent most of my time going to the movies. And I also did a lot of reading, popular books, Stephen King novels and comic books and things like that. So I grew up as a kind of individual brought up in the MTV generation. MTV was just coming out as I was turning 12 or 13, something like that. And, I was just bombarded with all of these images. And then when I went into college, I was introduced to a work of literature for the first time. It was T.S. Eliot's The Wasteland. And with that work of literature, that really began my journey into mythology, because for some reason the poem just caught me, and I wanted to sort of learn what was going on in it. So I went out and I bought secondary sources, and I looked through it. And I saw how Eliot had woven this huge tapestry of myth together into this wonderful modernist poem. And for the first time, it struck me as a revelation how you could work mythology into the modern world. And in particular, Eliot's theme was that the modern world was wasted, that it was dying, that it was a world from which the mythological inspiration had gone, or was slowly dying. And, having grown up in a machine megalopolis with no soul, that resonated. That central insight resonated immediately, and I knew at once, intuitively, that I'd grown up in an environment where something was missing, something seriously was wrong. And so I just knew that instinctively. So I started following those threads, and one of those pathways led me into Joseph Campbell's work. his work, his interviews with Bill Moyers were airing at just about that time. This is in the late 80s, right after he had died. And the Moyers interviews really caught my attention. And here was a man who seemed, on the surface of it, to have all the answers. He had an answer for everything. And he showed the relationship of myth to the modern world. And particularly what started catching my interest was when he started talking about Star Wars. And and suddenly I realized that all these films that I had grown up and loved as a child were actually part of a much, much longer story, as you say in your introduction, that go back to the dawn of civilization, and that these films were continuing with the latest chapter of this dialogue that we've been having ever since, the epics of Gilgamesh. So that's sort of my background, and that's, what attracted me to these myths.
Why is it that we think we live without myth? Is it because we think we live in a scientific age and that myth is just something that our ancestors used to explain the world? It's something much, much more profound, and we're still spinning myths. We just don't really understand that very widely in our contemporary society.
Yeah, there's some ambiguity with the word myth, and I think that's part of the problem, and different scholars use the word in different ways. Campbell and Mircea Eliade and the generation of the Eranos scholars tended to use the word myth to refer primarily to sacred narratives, and sacred narratives are usually bound up with concrete rituals. So whenever you're going to a ritual, you are in the presence of a myth because the ritual is the enactment of the myth. So you don't have that performance without the indwelling myth. The myth is the sort of DNA of which the ritual is the physical extrasomatic presence, the acting out of it. But the other aspect of it is that you can also use the word myth in the broadest possible sense to refer to the human capacity to tell stories, just stories generally. And in that sense, you would include things like folk tales and novels and works of literature in which myth-making indeed does continue going on. But it doesn't go on, at the level of the society with, the highest level in terms of the sacred institutions of the society. Those sacred institutions we inherited from Christianity, and it was indeed the advent of science, really starting in the 17th century when it got rolling, that dismantled the entire edifice of what we inherited as a biblical mythology. And so when that cracked and fell apart, and it's still falling apart, we get the sense that this is a mythless society because we don't have a single all-encompassing mythology where we can go as a group and perform a ritual and all believe and share the same assumptions. That no longer holds. So in a way, we have substitutes for it. We all go to movie theaters, and we share a group experience when we sit in this darkened womb cavern and we watch these fantasies that are projected on the screen. And it's very much analogous to what happens at night when we go to sleep and we dream, and we have these dreams in which these images are projected forth onto the canvas of our inner minds. And it's a very similar experience. And these movies are sort of cultural dreams and nightmares of the processes that Western civilization is trying to work out right now, specifically the major problem being that of the machine. And so as a result of that, you find turning up in these films, which I think of as modern myths, you find turning up this fight with these machines and robots and armies of mechanical dragons. And the reason that is so is because that is our collective Western psyche telling us that it's having a nightmare about our machines. That is to say, we have this split-level attitude about it. We have the conscious, waking attitude, which as a society, we train and breed all these engineers, and they go out and perform these wonders, and we take these gadgets home, and we just think they're marvelous. But our unconscious psyche thinks something else about the machines, and it projects what its point of view is through these mythological narratives. And sometimes that point of view can be totally at odds with our conscious waking assumptions. So there's a conflict there, and that conflict is what's being worked out in these films.
Oh, this is exciting because we're looking at what are we losing? What is the machine in all of its benefits asking us to give up or forcing us to give up? A lot of it. And that this is a very old story, that even in the advent of Samaria, one of the oldest megapolis, they asked those same questions. I find that fascinating. You can see that in the mythology that they were spinning out. They were all